Hi everybody. I'm so happy that you are here where the sun has finally come out in Bordeaux, and I think for the whole of your trip it's going to remain beautiful. I'm going to start off by giving you a little overview of what's happening in organics and biodynamics more generally in Bordeaux, and then I think Thomas and I will discuss specifically with Palmer and his experience. And I couldn't agree more with you that Thomas is one of the absolute best people to talk to about this in Bordeaux, because he manages to make it clear, and he's coming at it from the point of view of a winery which is exceptionally good quality and cannot afford to make choices that impact on that quality. So it really is coming to look at this is something that people can do that isn't purely for emotional reasons or even purely for environmental reasons, but it's about the quality of the wine. And so it's great to hear that from Thomas. So I think most of you have seen this book. But just to say that I'm not an expert specifically on organic and biodynamics, in that I haven't worked making these kind of wines, but there's something which has become more and more interesting to me. And I wanted to write this book from the point of view of you guys, to be one of the people who cares more and more about eating good food, about the whole farm-to-table movement, Thomas Keller, about these wonderful chefs who have really adopted this idea of caring about ingredients right from the beginning through to the plate. And I wanted to extend that to wine and to think about what is the motivation for people to do this. And you'll find in wine regions across the whole world, and in Bordeaux over the last really 5 to 10 years, there has been a shift, quite a significant shift, in terms of how people are thinking about sustainability. And classified growths like Palmer are estates which are being handed over from generation to generation, which are charging an awful lot of money per bottle to us as consumers. And so I think there's a real sense of responsibility to ensure that they are handing on vineyards which will be sustainable over the long term. So just to give you a couple of figures, as of 2016 in Bordeaux, so 2 years ago now, there are 467 certified organic estates in Bordeaux. So we have about 7,500 estates in total, which is a reasonable number. It's more than nearly 7,000 hectares of vines, and then about half of that again is in conversion, or maybe about 2,000 is in conversions working towards organics. For biodynamics, which is what Palmer is, and for my personal taste, when you're actually tasting the wine, I think there's more of an impact in how the wine is in your glass with biodynamics for me. I'm interested to know how you feel about those distinctions. But in terms of biodynamics, there are, as of 2016, 30 estates in Bordeaux that are certified. So you'll find many more that will be doing trials that might do 30 out of 60 hectares or 10 out of 20 hectares that are doing trials, but these are the figures for actually certified. There are a couple of consultants in Bordeaux. Stefan de Renencourt is one in particular, who has set up a specific arm of his consultancy to help estates who want to turn it to be biodynamic. And you cannot throw a stone in the vineyard today without finding somebody talking about this and wanting to get to know more. And something I'd love to hear from Thomas about as well, which I've found from a number of other, I'm thinking of Alan Moex, who does Château Fonroc over in Saint-Emilion. He said that when he started this about 10, 15 years ago, he was one of the real early adopters, that there was quite a lot of resistance from other classified growths in Saint-Emilion who felt that it was unimportant or he was crazy doing it. And he said people didn't come to see him to ask why and what was happening. But he said the last 2 or 3 years he has found a huge rise in other owners who are interested and who care enough to come and have a look and to find out why and what's happening. So I think this is something we're going to see more and more. There were a couple of negative press stories in the French press about the use of pesticides, not just in Bordeaux, but Bordeaux is a very big wine region. It's the largest appellation contrôlée region in France. So inevitably a lot of the focus is always here on Bordeaux. And I think there are something like 130 schools that are within close, next to vineyards. So there's an awful lot of interest in minimising impact on, obviously, on schools. But in areas like here in Pessac-Léognan, we're very close to the city centre. So again, you're thinking about your neighbours, you're thinking about trying to reduce impact on them. And it's why today, Margaux, where Palmer is, Margaux, I think, is the leading appellation in the Médoc for green movements. I'm pretty sure about 25% today of estates in Margaux are not necessarily certified organic or biodynamic, but are actively working very hard to reduce the impact, the footprint that they have on the environment. Saint-Emilion, over on the right bank, by 2020, if you want to put the name Saint-Emilion on your label, every single estate in Saint-Emilion has to be certified in some manner. Again, doesn't mean certified organic or certified biodynamic, although I hope most of them do, but they will have to be certified either haute valeur environnementale, which is in fact what they are here at Carbonnieux, which is a very rigorous set of rules whereby you have to be sure that you're recycling water, that you're minimising your treatments and doing all kinds of things. So they'll have to be that. Or there's another thing called SME, small environmental something or other, and that again, these are things that are being looked after by the CIVB, so the main wine bureau in Bordeaux, and they're working with the states to bring, to make this happen. So Saint-Emilion is really taking the lead. Castillon, again over on the right bank, about 25 to 30% of all chateaux in Castillon are certified today. So that's probably, as of right now, the appellation which is the most impressive in terms of its green credentials. But it's something that's been wonderful to live through. For me, I moved here in 2003. Last night I met a lovely woman who now is living in New Zealand. She's a Kiwi, and she lived here for about 13 years. She worked at Château Carbonnieux up in the Médoc. She was actually the first female cellar master at Carbonnieux in pretty much, I imagine, in Bordeaux. And she said that she walked through the vines yesterday, and she left here in 95, and her recollection of the vines in 95 in the Médoc was everything was weed killer. There was no grass between the rows. Everything had been chemically treated to be sure there was no weed. And she said it absolutely struck her yesterday, walking through the vines in the Médoc, that was so different, that she really saw grass growing, that she saw more biodiversity. She really could feel the change. So this is all very positive. So I would like to now just start to talk with Thomas. I think we'll really do a conversation about Thomas's experience. And in fact, one thing before I move on to chat with Thomas is there are things that are difficult in Bordeaux. To be organic in Bordeaux, it's oceanic climate. We're by the sea here. You don't always get beautiful days like today, so that's been tough. But also there's something about the structure of Bordeaux, and this is where Palmer is particularly interesting. Bordeaux is run in the system where the chateaux make the wine, but then négociants sell it. Usually the chateaux don't sell directly. So what that means is it's not the owner telling the consumer, this is why you should buy my wine. I'm a small guy and I work organically and I care about these things. You're not having that. You've got a négociant who is selling 100 different labels or 150, and he may not tell your story as well. I think that is probably a slight break on the change to organics here. But then there is another thing, that the chateaux are big, and a lot of them have shareholders. So again, it's not necessarily the owner who is living there and who is making the wine. They could be people, the chateaux who are owned by businesses or by families, but they have a number of shareholders. And that is much harder to convince them, because maybe they want their dividends, maybe they're not thinking so much about the soil. And it's how do you convince them, how do you make the case? So if we could start actually there, because Palmer, this stunning third growth in Margaux, was in the situation where Thomas had to convince the people who were on the board of Palmer that his choice was the right one. So maybe we could start there.
Well, before convincing the shareholders,
you had to be convinced yourself.
we have to be convinced ourselves. Which was not really obvious quite a while ago now, just because what we've been studying at school was everything but organic farming and the biodynamic approach. What we've been studying at school was really this scientific approach that is the result of what we call here in France les 30 glorieuses. So all the the time after the Second World War, where productivism became something major in every kind of field, but in agriculture in particular. So in the old days, the way my team and I would see a vine was very simple. For us, it was like a little factory using minerals from the soil, using nitrogen, using CO2, using sun energy to produce something. And our job as engineers was to make sure that those little factories would work fine, that we had the right oil at the right point, you know. When we decided to experiment biodynamic, it was mostly by curiosity. So it was just after the 08 harvest. Of course, we had several chances to hear people talking about biodynamic. Most of the time, they had long hair. They were talking moon, planets. They were talking very strange preparation out of a horn that you would dig, you know, somewhere, whatever. We were like, whoa, that's very different from our little factory approach. But, you know, in life, if you want to understand something, you have to experiment. So we decided to put together very, very small experimentation. One block divided in two pieces, one classically grown, and another one following, so said, the biodynamic approach. And so we asked someone, Mathieu Boucher, quite an experience, to help us. And I must say that for...
Did he have long hair?
No, I think he was quite bald like me, you know. But he had, yeah, well, he was in this move. So we started to experiment, and I must say that most of what we were doing, we had no idea. And we had two very interesting results. One was that we were able, on this little plot, to grow vines without any pesticides, no chemicals. Hey, that cannot hurt, you know. Second result, in 2009, when we made the wine from this little plot, and when we compared it with the wine from the other plot, the wine from the biodynamic plot was not worse than the classic one. That means that we were able to grow a vineyard and we were able to make a decent wine from it. So we pushed a little bit the machine. And our owners, our shareholders, they were looking at us. All right, fine. I mean, if you want to play, play. You know, obviously they had absolutely no idea what it was and what was the expectation from that. 2011, one very interesting result. A wine, so we extended the experimentation. The wine from a plot, biodynamically farmed, was the best we had ever produced. So we thought, well, it's not only same quality or not worse, but it can be better. And I'm going to talk about the better idea later. And we started to have feelings. Feelings that instead to see the vine as this little factory and thinking machinery, we started to see the ensemble. We started to have this, what we call holistic vision of this farm. Holistic vision means that the vine and the vines are important. The soil has a sense. The life in the soil is important. All the weeds, all the trees, everything was important. A little bit like if this farm was a living organism where all elements should be in harmony. Like a human body, you know? When all your organs work fine together, you have no problem. When one starts to move somewhere, you have to rebalance, try to rebalance. And so it really became something quite interesting, totally different from what we learned in the old days. No pesticides, this holistic vision, and a very interesting view of the future. And so now that was the time for us to go to our shareholders and to try to convince them to move this direction. It was easy. It was easy for several reasons. One was to explain that by avoiding any chemicals, we would preserve the soil, the life of this soil, and so the future of the place, the future of the asset. Easy. Second, people working in the vineyards would not be exposed anymore to chemicals. Makes sense, you know. Third, wine consumer, food consumer are paying more and more attention to the way those products are made. So let's try to go the right direction. And last point, we were convinced that slowly but surely, going this direction, we could have a better link, a shorter link between the wine and the place where the fruit comes from. The idea being that we're not liquid with alcohol producer. We try to put in a glass a place. When you drink a glass of Château Carbonnieux, when you drink a glass of Château Palmer, what you want is to drink a place, to drink a product that cannot be produced elsewhere. And we had the feeling that going this direction would help. And so our owners, I'm a bit long, but I'm almost done. Our owners were easy to convince, but they said, okay, but don't screw up. We want a crop. And they said, and if you think you lose control, please don't hesitate, use a chemical. And we said, yes. 16 happened. We had a very difficult spring.
So 13 was fine for you?
13 was fine. We had,
13 was also
well, it was quite complicated. And by the way, 13 was a very important vintage for us because we had 2/3 of the vineyard biodynamically farmed. We had a hard time, but we were able to go through the difficult conditions. It was a bit different. 16, to make it very short, we had a lot of problem with Downy Mildew. We lost 20% of the crop. Board meeting in July, a little bit tough. And so they asked us, why? Why didn't you choose to use a chemical? And we said, well, because it was too late. Because when we knew that we would lose control, it was too late to use a chemical. They were not super happy with my answer, I must say. And what is fascinating is that 3 of the board members asked us to organize for them 4 entire days to explain what we were doing, to explain what biodynamic was. And after those 4 days, they were convinced that a chemical spray is not an option, no matter what the risk can be.
So I would like to pick up on that and to ask you, one of the things that I found very interesting when I was researching this, wherever I was asking about biodynamics around the world, everybody had different ideas maybe for why they started, but what everybody found was that it changed their relationship with their staff, with the other people that worked at the vineyard. And because it's not something that you can half do, everybody has to be committed to it. But obviously that means there's more manpower involved. Potentially, it's a question: is there more manpower involved? Does it cost a lot more to do it? And what are the small differences that you find? And just to give an example, there's a wonderful estate in Saint-Emilion that's called Fontplegard, and they are currently converting to biodynamics. And one of the things that's very interesting is talking to the cellar master. The cellar master said he used to come into work and he would go straight into his bit of the chateau. He'd go into the cellar and check what was going on. But he said now he gets into work and he goes and feeds the chickens. And it's much more, he cares much more about what's happening out in the vineyard than he did before he just saw his bit. So I'd love to hear from Thomas about that, about how it changes, not just the vines, but the people.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we spoke about the shareholders.
Yeah.
Of course, they were important to convince, because without their agreement, that wasn't an option. But we are a bit more than 60 now at Château Palmer, and without everybody commitment, this is not an option either.
How many were you back when you started Biodynamics? Have you increased the number of people?
Yes, a little bit. I think we were 50 probably, and we're now 60. Is it more labor intensive? Yes and no. Yes and no. I think when you are at a certain level, you try to do everything best, and going this direction is not really different. What is different is that you have to be very dedicated to the vineyard, and you have to be in the vineyard all the time. Just to give you an idea, we were talking mildew, this disease that can damage and destroy the crop. When you use chemicals, you spray the chemicals, they will go inside the vine, and they will protect the vine from the inside. So if it does rain, which is a problem for mildew, when you have rain, the mildew can develop, no problem, because the vine is protected from the inside. When you are organic or biodynamic, the only thing you can use is a natural product that is called bouillie bordelaise, copper sulfate. It is just on the outside, and if it rains, so the vine is protected, but after a few millimeters of rain, the copper sulfate is washed, and so the vine is not protected. So what happened? I mean, the vine is protected by a spray. It rains. Good. And then you know that you'll have another rain in 2 or 3 days, you have to go in the vineyard again. When with the chemicals, no problem. 12 days, protected, fine. So that means that, well, this year we had a very difficult spring, very challenging. We had to be in the vineyard twice on a Sunday. So you really need a dedicated team, you know.
This is France as well, where not everybody wants to work weekends.
Of course, of course. 35 hours a week. And no, it can be challenging. But, you know, for people working at Palmer, I mean, the same story. Their reaction was very positive. Because when we had this discussion about the future, they said, well, so do you mean that we will not be exposed to chemicals anymore? Yes, that's part of the program. Fantastic. We're following you. You know, but it's not easy. It's not easy. I mean, it's much easier when you are a very small estate, like few hectares in Burgundy. You do everything yourself. It just depends on you. When you are 60, you know.
And how about your biodynamic treatment? So I'm sure you know, as Thomas mentioned at the beginning, there are a few biodynamics which have captured the imagination, the idea of the cow horns that you bury. Do you make your own? There are many different biodynamic preparations that you make that you can either buy or you can produce. Mm-hmm. Do you make them yourself at Palmer? Is that something that you think is important?
Mm. Yeah, we most of them we make ourselves, because the idea of this living organism is to go through an autonomy. We like the idea of a cycle, the matter cycle. So, for example, we have cows. You know, this famous 500 preparation, this is a horn. You will put manure on it. It has to be a beautiful cow poop, you know. You have to choose it very carefully. When it's from your own estate, it makes even more sense, because the cow used the matter from the place. So you put this beautiful poo in the horn. You bury the horn for the entire winter, and then you take it back, and you will use this preparation, 130 gram per hectare in water that you will dynamize, and you will spray it on the land.
So by dynamize, basically means stir very, very fast in a particular way. And how many horns do you bury?
We do 100 a year.
So this is what's so fascinating, is you hear these things, and you think, okay, a cow horn, and then you get into the actual dynamics of it, the actual mechanics of it, and there is a lot of horns that you're burying, and it's really fascinating. But how do you pick where you bury them? And
yeah, it's a special field. So it sounds totally crazy, you know? Because let me tell you, the idea is a cow with 2 horns will be like a big antenna that will grab all the energy, the waves from the cosmos. That's the idea. This horn with the manure on it in dirt for 8 months will capture those waves from the cosmos, and this manure will have a lot of energy. Okay, so when I'm talking like that, you say, okay, stop it. Where are your long hairs? Well, I don't have any. First thing, when you take the poo in the field and you put it in the horn, it doesn't smell fantastic, I must say. When you take this horn out of the soil after 8 months, it smells fantastic. When you do the spray and you look at what happens in the land, you can really feel that there is life again. It's incredible.
This is something that's really important to note as well. On a more general level, and for everybody who is farming, and it's not just about vines, but farming in lots of things, one of the unarguable effects of having had 30, 40, 50 years of quite intensive agriculture all over the world is that there's a lot less life in our soils today as there was before. I mean, that is no question that is measurable scientifically. So that's one of the things that's particularly fascinating with biodynamics, is seeing that soil come back to life.
10 years ago, after let's say 10 days of dry weather, I would go in our vineyard, I would take a little bit of dirt like that, I would do that. Now if I do the same, everything stays in my hand. A lot of little roots, a lot of life, beautiful structure of the soil. Preparations, everything, okay, brilliant. But now, I mean, if you just try to have a larger picture. First vineyards used by human were probably in Georgia 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, something like that. From that time to the 1850s, no problem. No problem. No mildew, nothing. No spray. So it's for more than 4,000 years. It's been 150 years that we're having problem. There's something wrong there. There's something unbalanced. Another thing, take a vine, go in the forest, plant the vine next to a tree. The vine will grow in the tree. Can rain showers. Look at the vine. No mildew, no disease, no nothing. Put 10 cows on a 100 acres fields. Leave them. They'd be fantastic. Put those 10 cows in a very narrow place. You'll see what happens.
When I was researching this book, I got a lot of help from two particularly brilliant guys who live in Burgundy, who are called the Bourguignons. They are soil and terroir specialists who work now with select properties in Bordeaux. For years they said they didn't want to come to Bordeaux because the Bordelais would never understand what it is that they're doing. Now they do work with select properties in Bordeaux. And when I was asking them, how do I pick who to choose? Who do I know is telling the truth about this or is just using it for marketing? And they said, well, you'll only know if you go to the vineyard, and what you need to do is pick up the soil and smell it. They said the best thing to do is when you go to a vineyard, so you guys need to try this when you're in your vineyards over the next couple of days, is smell the soil, because healthy soil will smell good. And soil that doesn't have life to it won't really smell of anything at all. It was very good, it was good advice. So.
Yeah. And that I remember precisely. You know, after several years of experimentation, going in the vines and following the tractor, plowing the soil, and that was something really different from everything I had experienced before.
So let's talk about classified growths. Okay, so we're here in a Cru Classé de Grave. Palmer is an 1855 classified estate. What do you think about how do you think the way that you are farming is going to become part of the rules? Do you think it will become essential, or do you think it will remain up to the individual owners?
Earlier you gave few numbers, okay? So 7-8% of the vineyard here in the region are certified. But you said something very important to me. You said that much more estates are experimenting. And pretty much every growers I know here in Bordeaux are experimenting. So some are experimenting on very small plots, others on a much larger one. Why? And what I'm going to say is a little bit controversial, but I think everybody knows that there are no other options than to just let the chemicals behind us. There is an incredible controversy at the moment on copper. The agrochemical industry are lobbying hard, deep, with a lot of power, trying to convince everybody that copper is extremely dangerous. And there are discussions on the European blah, 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 to decide if copper should be forbidden or not. So we could be in the situation where copper, which is a natural product, could be forbidden when other products that, and we know that, have impact on cancer, have impact on reproduction, have impact on mutations, would be permitted. This is just unbelievable. Copper, yes, I mean, if you use like a lot of copper, you will not have life in our soil. But just to give you an idea, on an average, the way we measure copper in the soil is copper equivalent metal. And we use 2.5 kilogram metal copper per year per acre. In the old days, when they had just this, they would use 15 or even 20. We're following carefully what happens in the soil, and now it's been, when the oldest plot, biodynamically farmed at Palmer, is now grown this way for 10 years. We're following very carefully what is happening, and I can tell you, copper in the soil, 0. Why? Because there's this life in the soil that knows how to manage it. So, yeah, this is the future. When you follow the policies, the amount of copper you're allowed to use in biodynamic versus organic is lower. Yeah. But it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. Difference between organic and biodynamic is that organic, you just avoid chemicals. Biodynamic, you have a different approach of farming, you know? This different approach will definitely help to have better life, better balance between all those elements. And I am convinced that a soil biodynamically farmed may work in a better way than just organic.
Yeah.
So biodynamic is not organic plus. Biodynamic is just a global vision.
I think that really is an important point, that it looks at everything from a very different point of view. Whereas with organic, you're not really, I mean, of course it's still fantastic and a great thing to do, but you're not really changing the way you approach what you do at each different time of the year. You're simply using different products to do those same things. Mm-hmm. Whereas biodynamics is very much, you start again at the beginning and you look at how you do everything, and it's very different. But it's also very individual. Biodynamics much more than organics. Yeah. And there's a book, there's the guy Rudolf Steiner that I'm sure you've heard of, who was kind of the father of biodynamics, and he wrote a book in the 1930s, I guess 20s, talking about this. And most biodynamic farmers or viticulturists that I have spoken to say the first time they read it, they didn't understand a word of it, and they put it away. And they thought, I can't do this. And so they put it away, and then little by little, through themselves, they came back to it, experimenting, wanting to make their vineyards better and healthier, and their wines taste better. We must keep coming back to that, and we should talk about that, about the taste. What does it do for us, the consumers, who love wine? Why, what are we going to find in the glass? But anyway, this is what I found again and again and again, people saying to me they were almost put off at the beginning because it was so confusing and so esoteric, and then when they started doing it a bit themselves and they started to see the difference, they then went back and read what he did again, and then it started to make sense. But every time they had to interpret it the way they wanted. It had to be their own kind of path in, and not following a set of rules.
No, exactly. I mean, I read this book several times, and I still have to read it several times.
Me
you know?
too. I've also tried reading. I didn't get all the way through.
But it is very inspiring. It just but in the end, it's just back to the way it was. You know, what was the farm in the early 1800s? It was just a place with a little bit of vineyard, fruit trees, a few animals, a little bit of barley, blah 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 blah. Autonomy. Yeah. And why? Because to fertilize your vine, you need manure, etc., etc. Today, few years ago, after harvest, time to fertilize, I would check a catalog. Oh, I have a good price for this, or I have a good price for that. Let's bring it from the outside. Let's put it in the vineyard. That's it. Nowadays, harvest done, cover crop, weeds everywhere. I open the gate, 250 sheep in the vineyard. Mowing the cover crop, using the cover crop to fertilize. Easy. I mean, nothing revolutionary. It has always been like that in the past. And in the end, that's what Steiner explains so well. He said everything started to go bad direction when people changed, how do you say, les bœufs?
Oxen.
Oxen. When people changed oxen and they started to use horses because it goes faster. And then horses, they would use mechanic horses. It goes faster. And then instead you have a little bit of this, a little bit of this, boom, 1,000 acres of this, 2,000 acres of this, and nothing else.
Not really connected exactly to organics, but talking about monoculture, which is a similar thing. Bordeaux obviously is an area which is very, very much dominated by the vine. As you drive through Bordeaux, you see it. There's really fascinating documents from the late 18th century. The vast majority of what you see in the Medoc today was planted between 1700 and 1750. And that's when a lot of the big chateaux were built up, and everybody went over to planting vineyards because it was like a gold rush. A lot of people could make money from it. And there's these fantastic documents that are from the time of around the French Revolution, saying that there were serious debates and worries in the in the Bordeaux Parliament about starvation, famine for people who lived in Pauillac, in Saint-Julien, and in Margaux, because everybody was planting vines. And so where previously there had been farms that had been making lots of different things, everyone suddenly was doing vines. And of course, at that time, you couldn't fly in food from elsewhere, you couldn't go up, it wasn't as easy to get stuff. So there were very serious debates. And I read a brilliant one about, there was a grain boat coming up from Bordeaux up to Pauillac, And the guys in Margaux hijacked the boat like pirates, took it, and there was this massive fight because they were trying to get the grain to come into Margaux.
We like that in Margaux, you know.
So I mean, it's just to put it in a bit of a historical context, monoculture has always had problems, even before people realised about the actual negative effects on the soils. It was always a bit controversial when you turn to monoculture.
But I remember when I was a kid, my grandfather used to tell me, best peaches you can ever experience are what we call in French les pêches de vigne. So peaches that come from the peach tree in the middle of the vineyard. If you look at the vineyard now, no peach trees, no cherry trees, and they were in the past. And so we are trying to replant those trees in the middle of, well, on the side of the vineyard, but in the middle of the vineyard as well. And that's another thing, you know, when in front of my board, I'm explaining that we start to pull out vines to plant fruit trees.
Happy with that.
But in the end, you know, a tree is like, has a lot of effects. One works like a water regulation. Too much water, because it's much bigger than the vine. Not enough, it will go super deep and just help the water to come back. We also made a study on insect diversity. And as soon as you have something else than a vine, a tree, a forest, you have a much better diversity, which is very helpful to control the pest, the one you don't want.
Yeah,
you know?
So you don't have to use the chemical pesticides because you have
Again, look at the forest. You know, there's not just one type of trees, a lot of different species living together.
I'm always approached by clients wanting to know, do you have organic wine? Do you have biodynamic wine? But most importantly, what is that? And then there's another point is natural wine. So as a Van Bordeaux fan in America, we have all these questions coming to us, and we try to do our best to explain it. But there is confusion, kind of the marketing point is. And then they want to know who is controlling this, who sets up the rules, because there's a group over here, perhaps in France, and then in Italy, and we're all confused in America. So from a commercial standpoint, it'd be helpful to kind of get some clarity on that and help us with this, because consumers are very interested in this process and the wines made biodynamically or organically or natural wine.
Organic, biodynamic, natural. First answer, very simple. Certifications do exist for organic wines, for biodynamic wines, no certification for natural wines. Okay? So I can tell you my wine is a natural wine, and all you have to say is, okay, that's it. You know? Organic wine, as I said before, is a wine that is made with fruits organically farmed, which means no chemicals. A biodynamic wine is a wine made with fruits biodynamically farmed, following Rudolf Steiner philosophy, and I tried to explain earlier what it was. Basically, this is this holistic vision that just help you to see your farm as an ensemble. Okay? So not just a production thing. Natural wine, not easy to explain. The idea behind natural wine is that a wine could be made without anything, which is interesting as an approach, even if you harvest a little bit of fruit, you crush it, you put it in a bucket, you come 1 week later, will it be wine? Vinegar. So natural wine is vinegar, basically. Okay?
That's totally unfair.
And I mean, if you go straight to the, but that's, again, a little bit simple. But the idea behind a natural wine is, again, to make something as simple as possible, as close as possible to Mother Nature. So what people try to do is, of course, to avoid selected yeast, to use zero SO2. To conclude, I would say that I have a lot of respect for people who try to make wines like that because it's the most difficult thing on earth. I mean, we are not able to make wine without SO2. We are able to lower, but we're not there yet. I mean, 0 SO2, I don't know how to do. So I have a lot of respect for those guys. I don't have respect for people who taste those kind of wines when they are just everywhere, full of problems, VA, oxidation.
Volatile acidity.
Yes, volatile acidity, so vinegar. A lot of things that are not appropriate. And they, oh my gosh, this is terroir. Bullshit. No, this is not terroir. This is incompetence. That's very different.
What else do you use copper for?
That's it. Yeah, we have so in Bordeaux the main issue is what we call Downy Mildew. We also have powdery mildew. That's something you may find in Napa, for example. So for powdery mildew, we can use just sulfur. Sulfur. This is not a big problem this year. We have big problem with a lot of pressure with downy mildew. But I mean, downy mildew, again, for me, it's just a sign of an unbalanced vineyard. I hope that one day we may have a vineyard in such a condition that mildew will not be a problem anymore. And we see it already in the vineyard. We have plots that are very sensitive and others that are much less.
So it's not a property of the grape itself, it's property of the climate, the microclimate.
I think it's a combination of both. You may have a location where the microclimate is a bit more a problem, but you also may have a vine that is old, that is in balance, that is just weak the way it has to be, that is much less sensitive to mildew. I mean, and it's just extraordinary. I mean, if you have a young vine, 5 years old, super powerful, full of nitrogen, with deep green leaves like that, this will be super sensitive to mildew. If you have an old vine, low vigor, with a very tender green like that, very low nitrogen, will be much less sensitive to mildew.
I wanted to ask about global warming and its impact on what you're doing.
Hey, when you plant a vine, it takes 10 years to have a decent production and at least 20 to get high quality. We know for sure that in the last 20 years, average temperature went up in the Bordeaux region. Not for the worst, I must say. The number of great vintages in the last 20 years is quite impressive. It might be a problem if it continues to go up, especially for a grape variety like Merlot that is quite sensitive to high temperatures. The thing is, everybody knows that there is a global weather change. In Bordeaux, it might turn into a cooler climate. We have this current in the Atlantic Ocean that is called Gulf Stream that regulates winter and summer. If this current disappears, we'll have much cooler winter and much warmer summer, like New York. So honestly, I don't know what to do now to anticipate, because we don't really know what's going to happen.
The taste of the wine, the quality of the wine, is the market receiving and giving you value for the tremendous efforts which you've done?
You know, when you talk taste, it's always subjective. That's why, the point system, sorry, Jane. I love to read what she writes.
Of course.
So it's very difficult to give you a very precise answer. My feeling is that time after time, we have more precision in what we're doing. And what I mean is that I have one plot in mind, a very old Merlot named La Chevalière. It has always been the most sophisticated Merlot of the estate. And nowadays, this mellow, the wine from La Chevalière, is more sophisticated than it has always been. That means that each personality expresses itself in a much clearer way. First part of my answer. Second part, does the market respond to what we're doing? Yes and no. I think the quality of our wines is recognized, and I'm very happy, I'm very grateful. But I don't think that we have success because we are biodynamic. We have success because our wines are good, and biodynamic helps.
Palmer has gone through all this, the resources to do it the right way, I mean, to do it intensively and in a well-organized fashion. But because I think many more chateaux will take it more seriously than they see what Palmer's done. I was curious about costs, and I'm not really trying to do finance, but I take it for granted if you don't buy the chemicals, you'll save something there. As you were just saying, if you're going to spend a lot more on labor, and I'm sure there are many other things about both sides that I don't know. Do you see it as being something that saves money, costs more money, or how does that work?
It's pretty neutral. It's neutral for us. We spend less in chemicals, we do a bit more work, but it's balanced. If we were $10 bottle of wine producer, it would be much more expensive. Because when you are Carbonnieux, Palmer, or another very famous estate, you put all your effort in the vineyard to make best as possible. And so, no.